This is the Behringer RD-9 drum machine, which is based on the classic Roland TR-909 from 1983. The 909 was Roland's successor to the 808 and became a massive influence in electronic music. I bought this RD-9 with my own money, so here's my unbiased and honest review. Hello everyone, this is... The build quality in general is good. The step keys are a bit of a disappointment though, because they look like the keys of a mechanical keyboard, but they have neither the satisfying click nor the right pressure point. I would describe the feeling as spongy. You get used to it after a while, but the RD-8 step buttons are much better in that regard. What surprised me was that some knobs are easier to turn than others. The bass drum attack, for example, is smooth running, while the bass drum level is very tight. The casing is the same as the RD-8, so it's quite large, which might be a downside for you if you don't have much room. Here's a digitact, a drum brute impact, and a pocket operator for scale. Master and headphone volume, effects section, edit commands, mode selector, sync settings, the sequencer, and finally the instruments and their parameters. The RD-9 is powered by an 18-volt DC power adapter, which is included. A full-size stereo headphone jack, which has its own volume control. The mono main output, standard 1/4-inch mono jack. Unless noted otherwise, we recorded the RD-9 through this output straight into an audio interface with no post-processing. A return input, which is a mono return after the effects bus. A USB B-type connector, just for MIDI, not for audio. MIDI in, MIDI out, and MIDI through. 10 full-size 1/4-inch mono outputs, one for each instrument. If you plug something in there, the respective instrument is taken away from the mix-out. The individual outs are not routed through the filter or the wave designer, and they're not affected by the main volume knob. And finally 3 full-size trigger outputs, and a mini jack sync in and out. The RD-9 is a hybrid drum machine. It uses samples for the crash, ride and hi-hats. All other sounds are generated by analog circuitry. I'm going to quickly play through the sounds, adjusting parameters where available, so you can get a feeling for what's possible. Bass drum. Snare drum. Low, mid and high tom. Hand clap, rim shot, open hat, closed hat, the open and closed hi-hat form a choke group. One silences the other when it plays, which imitates the behavior of a real hi-hat. Ride cymbal. And finally the crash cymbal. The sounds can't be panned left or right. This drum machine operates only in mono. The RD-9 has 3 instrument controls that weren't on the original 909. Bass drum pitch depth, bass drum pitch, and hi-hat tune. If you want the sounds to be as close as possible to the original, you can completely deactivate these knobs by switching to authentic mode. So much for theory, but there is a small problem with that. A viewer of ours has made us aware of something interesting. Listen to these 909 hi-hat samples. They were recorded from original Roland TR-909s. Compare them to the RD-9 in authentic mode. Notice the pitch difference? So, ironically, in enhanced mode, we can get much closer to the original pitch than in authentic mode. There are no presets or kits on the RD-9. What you see dialed in on the controls is exactly the sound you'll get. You can send any of the sounds into the effects bus using the Send button. The selected instruments are collectively processed by the wave designer and then the filter. The filter can be turned on or off and toggled between low pass and high pass. Using the cutoff and resonance controls, we can do filter sweeps or emphasize certain frequencies of an instrument. The bass drum, for example. The wave designer is a transient shaper. It allows us to manipulate the attack and sustain portion of the incoming sound. By the way, the headphone output is completely dry. You don't hear any of the effects on it, and if you plug in individual outs, they will still be audible on the headphones, unlike the main out where they are removed. That doesn't seem right. Revolution 909 by Daft Punk. Die da von den Fantastischen Vier. Vogue by Madonna, probably the biggest mainstream hit to ever feature the 909. It borrowed heavily from the 1980s house music scene. Every Eurodance song ever. Silhouettes by Floating Points. And finally, here's Take Me Home by Phil Collins.
Listen, if you play one more Phil Collins song, I'm out. And I'm taking Beatbunny with me.
Oh, okay. So, instead, here's Exhibitionist Mix 3 by Jeff Mills? Well, alright then. Welcome to our popular game of analog versus digital. Today's contenders are the analog Behringer RD-9 and Roland's newest drum machine, the TR-6S, which features a fully digital ACB recreation of the 909. By the way, we have a review coming up of this one real soon, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. One is analog, one is digital. But can you hear the difference? And does it really matter? You will now hear 5 patterns and you will have to decide for each one which is analog and which is digital. Post your guesses in the comments.
I bet they're all digital.
Oh, you. Let's go. We will post the correct answers right here in the comments section next week. The RD-9 has 16 pattern banks. They're a bit misnamed as songs here, with 16 patterns each. So, 256 patterns in total, which is plenty. Each pattern can have a length of up to 64 steps. Playing and editing patterns is pretty self-explanatory. At first it can be a bit confusing that your changes are undone by the running light of the sequencer. But that's actually quite useful for one-off changes during live performances. So, be sure to turn record on if you want your changes to be permanent. And if you want to brush up on how to program patterns, take a look at the first episode of Drum Machine 101. The current instrument can be live recorded by tapping the trigger button. Quickly chaining patterns together is not possible. You'll have to resort to song mode for that. There's also polymeter mode. This allows each instrument to have a different pattern length. This is a simplified excerpt of Rosetta Stoned by Tool. The closed head pattern is just 4 steps long. On top of that plays a snare that repeats every 12 steps. The rimshot pattern is 24 steps long. And finally, here's the kick with 48 steps. Now here's a specialty the 909 is famous for. Press a blinking active step again and it becomes a solid red accented step. That's how you place individual accents. If you want to place global accents, you just hold tap hold and press a step, which then lights up white. The accent knob controls the intensity of the total accent. What's special about this is that the individual and global accents add up, and you achieve maximum oomph only when the two are combined. Under Settings, Repeat, we can select a step to split into substeps. In this mode, you can't see where your active underlying steps are. You'll have to memorize them beforehand or listen for them while the sequencer is playing. After selecting a step, you can activate Note Repeat and choose a division. The RD-9 supports 2, 4 and 8 substeps. But luckily there's a faster way of placing substeps, and this can be done from the normal sequencer view. Make sure Note Repeat is on, hold any step, and as soon as you press the trigger button, the current repeat setting will be applied to that step. You don't even have to be in record mode for that. If you deactivate and activate a step, it resets it. Substeps can also be live recorded with a Note Repeat performance feature. In addition to substeps, we also have a flam option per step. Let's place flams on some of these snare hits. The flam has no effect if the flam width is at 0, but as soon as you increase it, you can hear that it sounds as if the drum is hit with 2 sticks, almost at the same time, with just the tiniest bit of delay. In addition to the usual swing ranges from 50 to 75%, you can also have negative swing from 25 to 49%. No microtiming. All steps are quantized to the grid. No, the instrument sound parameters can't be automated, but you can automate the filter cutoff. The movement of the filter cutoff knob can be live recorded. Or you can just manually enter values per step. The transition between the values is smoothed out, so you don't have any sudden jumps. The filter automation is stored with each pattern. The BPM ranges from 20 to 240, no decimals. By default, the tempo setting is saved with each pattern, but you also have the option to save the tempo per song or even globally. There's no metronome, but you can tap the tempo by tapping Tap-Hold 3 times. The sequencer can be set to 5 different tempo multipliers, which are saved with each pattern. Half speed for 8th notes, 3/4 speed for 8th note triplets, normal speed for 16th notes, 1.5 times speed for 16th triplets, and double speed for 32nd notes. The sync options can be changed here. The default is the RD9's own internal sequencer clock, then there's MIDI, MIDI over USB, and the sync input. For the latter you have a few clock rates to choose from. 1, 2, 4, 24, and 48 pulses per quarter, and 1 pulse per step. As you saw earlier, the RD9 has 3 trigger outputs for triggering external gear. Trigger out 1 and 2 are permanently tied to the rim shot and hand clap respectively, while trigger out 3 is freely assignable to any of the analog instruments. There's a pretty good offering of convenience features. When selecting patterns, you can see which patterns are used or empty. Unfortunately, this guide disappears when copying, saving or erasing patterns. It would also have been really helpful there. You can also erase single instruments, sweep erase single instruments, and clear whole banks. For copying patterns, there's a complicated route. But fortunately also this lovely shortcut where you just hold copy and press the destination. You can't copy and paste single instrument tracks, but you can copy and paste whole pages, but only inside of the current pattern. If you want to back up your machine or import and export patterns, you can do this via USB using the Behringer Synth Tribe tool. There are plenty of performance features: roll or note repeat, step repeat, which loops 1, 2, 4 or 8 steps, we can mute and solo instruments, and also instantly clear these mutes and solos. You don't lose any steps when shortening the pattern, so this could be used as a performance tool as well. As mentioned before, we can turn record off, and now any steps we place are one-offs that are undone by the running light of the sequencer. Autosave is turned on by default, so every change you make to a pattern is immediately saved. But if you turn autosave off, you can mess with the pattern. And when you're done, you can simply revert it to its last saved state. A feature that I always find useful is seamless pattern copy. This means you can create a copy of the current pattern and switch to that copy without interrupting playback. There's also a pattern unroll function. This extends the length of the pattern and clones its existing content into the newly added steps. This way you can seamlessly add another bar to your pattern and already have something to work with instead of silence. Triggering the instruments or finger drumming is only possible if the sequencer is not running. This means you can't record multiple instruments at the same time. As you already saw during the Jeff Mills pattern, you have to switch instruments with the select buttons and then tap them in separately. The pads are not pressure sensitive, but you can hold Tap-Hold for an accent. You can of course connect a MIDI device to the RD9 to trigger the sounds externally. What's really nice is that you can set the MIDI note values for the drums directly in the RD9. You don't need a computer for that. And in case you were wondering, No, sadly there aren't any MIDI CCs to control the sound parameters. In the Random Steps menu, you can select Instruments and place steps. One of these selected instruments will be randomly triggered wherever a random step is placed. Then we have probability steps. Under Settings, Probability, you can select which step should be affected by probability. Either right here or back in the normal sequencer view, we can set a probability value in %. Currently the probability steps play every time. Now only 50% of the time. And now never. Song mode is like a playlist for your patterns. You have 16 slots to place your patterns in. They have to be from the current bank though. You can decide for each slot how often its pattern should repeat. The maximum is 255 times. Then there's another mode in which you can chain whole songs together. Autofill is a very useful feature. It allows you to piggyback a shorter pattern onto the end of your current pattern. This is the main pattern. And here we have a few different fills. As you can see, the fills are shorter than the main pattern. While we're on the main pattern, we can now cue any other pattern as an autofill. The autofill is now played instead of the pattern's regular ending. It's too bad that these autofills can't be used in song mode. Normally when selecting a pattern, it's played after the current pattern has finished playing. But if I hold the pattern button while selecting a pattern, the sequencer now instantly jumps to that pattern. We enter it at the current playback position, so we can freely remix patterns. You can also use the note repeat feature to make engine noises on the low tom. When switching to enhanced mode, the hi-hat pitch setting from the knob isn't applied. Only when you turn it, the setting updates. On the kick drum it works fine. And it's no surprise that the RD-9 has the same quirks as the RD-8. The auto-scroll setting is not saved and always off when loading a song. You have to turn it on manually every time after loading a song, or else your song will be stuck on the current pattern. There's also some good news. On the RD-8, instrument mixing was designed in a way that the signal polarity of the individual instrument outputs is inverted in relation to the main out under certain circumstances. On the RD-9 that's no longer the case. The polarity always stays the same. And yes, that irritating separator line between step 9 and 10 also made it to the RD-9. There aren't any step colors to use for orientation this time, but the lower overlay has been broken into separate segments, which helps a lot. This labeling doesn't make much sense now that you can autofill every pattern, but to be fair, the firmware change probably came after the hardware went into production. If you're coming from other machines with a total accent, the accent level knob behavior can be easily mistaken as buggy. The RD-9 can actually save the accent level per pattern, so on a freshly programmed one, you have to first change the accent level for it to take any effect. According to the manual, there's supposed to be a system setting that makes the accent level knob work globally or per song, but I couldn't find it. High blinkiness and a good boot sequence. The RD-9 is currently on sale for about €350 or $350 US. Let's be honest, this is basically a light grey RD-8, but with different instruments, which is a good thing. Already at its release, the RD-9 benefits from all the firmware improvements the RD-8 has gotten over the last 2 years. It has the same good sequencer, usability and performance features, which I'm happy with. The exception being the concept of live data and stored data, which I think could have been handled a bit better. Remember those little alien icons that we used on our RD-8 cheat sheet to mark weird and inconsistent things? Our new RD-9 cheat sheet has these as well. Yay! Check it out on our Patreon. Every single thing from this review and more is explained in detail there. I like the concept of authentic and enhanced mode, where you can basically switch between an original 909 and a modded one with more controls. But why only 3 enhanced controls? There's lots of room here. What about rimshot pitch, or clap reverb? Or maybe some parameters that make the toms more flexible? Oh well. To be honest, I'm more of an 808 person myself, but in the last months, as I transcribed more and more 909 songs, it really grew on me, and I must say they nailed the sound pretty well. Is there anything you'd like to know about the RD-9 in detail? Let us know in the comments. We decided to keep the channel ad-free, so please support us on Patreon.
Beatbunny